Hi, I'm Lillian. My story began when I was just starting out in life, fresh out of college, landing my first real job in marketing, and finally moving into my own apartment. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a small one-bedroom with questionable water pressure and a radiator that sometimes refused to cooperate, but it was mine, and that meant everything to me. Growing up, my family was what you'd call traditional. I have an older brother, Lucas, who's 29. He's married to Sarah, and they have 2 kids. Mom and Dad still live in the house where we grew up, and every Saturday, like clockwork, we would gather there for dinner. It was one of those unspoken traditions we all followed. Lucas had just closed another major deal at work, and Dad couldn't stop talking about it. "That's 3 this quarter," he'd announce proudly, passing the mashed potatoes. Mom would chime in, "That's our boy, always knew he had it in him." Then she'd turn to Sarah with that adoring look, the one she reserved only for her. "Darling, that dress is stunning. You always know just what to wear." Meanwhile, I'd sit there pushing food around my plate, feeling like a stranger in my own family. Sarah would look at me with one of her looks, like I'd shown up at a black tie event in a trash bag. Even though we were the same height, she had this way of making me feel so much smaller. Those dinners felt like watching a play where everyone knew their lines, and I was just an extra sitting there with a forced smile. Mom would gloat over Sarah's latest accomplishment, another charity gala she had organized, a new fundraiser she'd launched. "She's become such a pillar of the community, like the daughter I never had," Mom would say with pride. I'd nearly choke on my wine hearing that one. The daughter she never had? I was sitting right there, but apparently I might as well have been invisible. These dinners were like a ritual, everyone playing their part. Dad would boast about Lucas's work successes. Mom would heap praise on Sarah for everything from her charity work to her fashion sense. The kids would run around making noise, but no one seemed to mind. Meanwhile, I sat there, feeling like a prop, more than a person. One Saturday, it was Mom who said it first, with that same look she always gave Dad when they were about to share something big. "We've made our will," she said, smoothing her napkin in that nervous way of hers. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Sarah and Lucas straightened up at the same time. Dad cleared his throat. "We've decided to leave everything to Lucas," he said. "The house, the cottage at the lake, all our savings." I stared at my plate, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. "Everything? They were leaving everything to Lucas?" Mom continued, her voice calm, practical. "Lucas has 2 children to think about. They need stability, a strong foundation for their future." I found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. "What about my future? I'll have my own family too. I'll have children someday." Mom's expression turned to that tight look she gets when she thinks I'm being difficult. "Lillian, dear, this decision is final. Your father and I won't be changing the will." It hit me like a tidal wave. All the years of being pushed to the side, of hearing endless praise for Lucas. It wasn't about his kids or his future. It was about Lucas. Always about Lucas. Suddenly, I was a little girl again. I remembered sitting in the school auditorium during my piano recital, staring at 2 empty seats in the parent section because Lucas had a soccer game. I was 12, holding up my straight A report card while they raved over Lucas's B+ in chemistry because he tried so hard. I was 15, crying in my room after my first breakup while Mom helped Lucas pick out a corsage for his girlfriend. 16, winning the writing competition at school, but no one showed up to the ceremony because Lucas had a college graduation that day. 18, giving my valedictorian speech, but my parents arrived late and left early to help Lucas move into his new apartment. Those memories hit me all at once, and it all became clear. "You've always loved him more than me," I blurted out. The words just spilled from my mouth before I could even stop them. The table went silent. Even the kids stopped playing with their desserts. Mom paled. "Lillian, that's ridiculous. We love both our children equally." "When have you ever shown that?" I shot back. "Name one time you chose me over him." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom and Dad exchanged looks, but I knew they couldn't name a single moment. There were none. "I'm done," I said, pushing my chair back from the table. I'm done pretending we're this perfect family where everyone is loved equally. I'm done trying to earn attention that's always been given to him freely. Don't expect me to come to any more family dinners. Don't expect me to keep playing the role of the grateful second-best child. Mom's face flushed red with anger. You're being selfish, Lillian. This isn't about money, I said, my voice shaking. This is about respect. You've made it crystal clear that you don't consider me your daughter, and you expect me to keep showing up, pretending everything's fine. Lucas sat there, quiet, looking uncomfortable, but of course, Sarah couldn't keep quiet for long. You're being ridiculous, Lillian, she said in that condescending tone I hated. Everything's perfectly fair. You're just being moody and arrogant, as usual. Something inside me snapped. All those years of her subtle jabs, her smug smirks, and her backhanded compliments. I was done. You know what, Sarah? Stay out of this, I said, my voice calm but firm. You're not even really family. You just married in and think that gives you the right to judge everyone else. This is between me and my parents. The dining room fell silent. Sarah's face crumpled, and right on cue, the waterworks started. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded as genuine as her fake designer handbags. How dare you speak to Sarah that way? Mom exploded, jumping to her feet. She's been nothing but kind to you. Dad's face turned that dangerous shade of red I remembered from childhood punishments. Get out, he growled. Get out of this house right now. Gladly, I said, standing up. Don't worry, it'll be the last time you have to throw me out. I won't be coming back. I walked out of the house without looking back, the door slamming shut behind me like the final period at the end of a very long sentence. That was the last time I saw any of them. 2 years passed in what felt like a blink. 2 years flew by in a blur. Life moved on, and I moved on too. I found myself in a place I never thought I'd be. Happy, settled, and surrounded by people who didn't see me as a prop in some well-scripted family drama. It was at a coffee shop that I met James. The whole thing was a random accident. He'd picked up my oat milk latte instead of his own. We laughed about it, and what started as a small, awkward exchange turned into hours of conversation. James was unlike anyone I had ever met. He actually listened when I talked. Like, really listened. It wasn't just about getting his words in or making a conversation flow. It was about understanding. And for the first time in years, someone was genuinely curious about me. Eventually, we started dating and things just clicked. He had a family that was warm, kind, and normal. There was no playing favorites, no hidden agendas, no drama, just love. After a year of dating, I found myself standing at the altar, marrying James. The wedding was exactly what I wanted. Small, intimate, no pretensions. James's mom helped me pick out my dress. His sister was my maid of honor. His extended family surrounded us, and it felt real, like a family I could finally breathe in. No judgment, no expectations. I didn't invite my parents or Lucas and Sarah. Some of our relatives tried to convince me to reconsider, saying it was my wedding day, that I'd regret it if I didn't invite my family. But deep down, I knew it was the right decision. And when I walked down the aisle, the joy in James's eyes, the warmth in the smiles around me, that feeling, I knew I had made the right call. There was nothing fake about it. A year later, James and I were blessed with twins, our beautiful boy and girl. The pregnancy wasn't easy, but James was there for every moment. I'll never forget the way he handled my weird cravings, the late-night panics when we'd wonder if we were ready for parenthood. When the babies arrived, we both agreed that I'd stay home with them. My marketing career could wait, those early years. They couldn't be replaced. Our life, though chaotic with 2 tiny humans in the house, was beautiful. It was the kind of noise I'd always dreamed of: laughter, pitter-patter of little feet, and endless stories at bedtime. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real family. I kept in touch with a few of my relatives, the ones who respected my boundaries. Aunt Marie would come over for Sunday brunch. Uncle Pete would stop by during holidays, and they never pushed me about my parents or Lucas. They respected my decision, and that meant everything to me. But as time passed, the noise of the past started to fade into the background. The memory of family dinners, the praise, the judgment, those things didn't hold the same power over me anymore. I built my own life, my own home, and it felt like the world was finally on my side. Until one day that peace was shattered. It started like any other Tuesday. I was cleaning up after breakfast, the twins sitting in the living room working on their latest masterpieces with crayons. The doorbell rang, and I figured it was the Amazon delivery I'd been expecting, but when I opened the door, it wasn't a delivery guy. It was my parents. "Lillian?" Mom said, her voice wavering. "We've missed you so much." I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles turning white. Someone must have given them my address, probably Cousin Rachel, who had been hinting at family reconciliation during her last visit. I felt the old tension rise in my chest. Dad added, "We want to see our grandchildren. We've waited so long." I couldn't even process the words. After 7 years of silence, they were standing there, acting like nothing had happened. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself. "No," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up after all this time and expect to walk into my life, into my children's lives, like nothing ever happened." They exchanged one of those looks, that same silent communication they always had. I didn't like it. Something was off. "Why now?" I asked, crossing my arms. "After all this time, why are you really here?" They hesitated. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Something happened, Lillian," he said. "The truth came out about Sarah. She's been unfaithful to Lucas for years." I stood there, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. "What?" Mom's tears began to fall freely now. "Lucas found her with someone else. He had the kids tested. The DNA results, Lillian." She choked back a sob. "Neither of them are his." I stood there in stunned silence. The kids, the ones they had doted on, the ones that had become the cornerstone of their perfect family narrative, weren't even related to us. They weren't family at all. But there was more. Lucas had been tested too, and it turned out he was infertile. He could never have biological children of his own. I stood frozen at the door, trying to digest what they were telling me. The irony hit me hard. The golden child, the son who could do no wrong, who had always been the one to get everything, his inheritance, his perfect family, his future, would never have biological children. His kids weren't even his. Dad's voice turned colder as he continued, "The children, those kids, are not our grandchildren. They never were. They're strangers. But your twins, they're our real grandchildren. They're our blood." I felt physically sick. For 10 years, these people had been grandparents to those kids. They had celebrated every birthday, bought every Christmas present, and plastered their social media with proud photos of their grandchildren. And now? They were erasing them like they never existed. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I said, my voice sharp. "Those children loved you. They called you Grandma and Grandpa. They didn't do anything wrong. How can you just stop loving them because of a DNA test?" Mom repeated, almost robotic. "They're not family." "No," I said, stepping back, holding the doorframe for support. "You need to leave. Get out of my house." My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger and disbelief. My children don't need grandparents who can turn their love on and off like a faucet. You can't just decide who's family and who's not when it suits you. Get out. Dad started to speak, but I cut him off. "Watch me." And then I closed the door. Just like that. I locked it, leaned against it, and listened as their footsteps retreated down the porch steps. After that, I didn't hear from my parents for a while. The silence was almost peaceful. It was as if I had finally found a way to carve out space where their voices no longer echoed, where their expectations didn't loom over my life. My children, our children, were happy, growing, and loved. James and I made our own family traditions, things that felt real, things that felt right. The world seemed to keep turning in a way that felt good, but that wasn't the end of it. Far from it. Every few days, I would find packages on our porch. Expensive toys, designer clothes for the twins, even a pair of matching iPads. I could feel the pressure building again. It was like they were trying to buy their way back into my life, into my children's lives, like they could erase all the damage they'd done with a few fancy gifts. I would gather up everything before the kids could see, packing it all into the car and donating it to the local children's shelter. But the gifts just kept coming. It didn't stop. Every time I thought it was over, something else would show up. Then, one Tuesday morning, I saw my mom's car across the street from the kindergarten. 2 days later, there was Dad, sitting on a bench near the playground pretending to read a newspaper. They were watching us. They didn't approach us directly, but I could feel their eyes on us, always lurking, always there. It was creepy. It was exhausting. And it was relentless. I had to do something. I couldn't keep looking over my shoulder every time I left the house, wondering when they'd show up next. So one evening after another package arrived, I decided enough was enough. James was in the kitchen, helping with dinner as usual, and I sat down at the table, opening my laptop. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I thought through my next steps. I needed to put my foot down. Once and for all, I typed the email, my words coming out sharp but clear. Mom and Dad, your behavior has become harassment. The gifts, the stalking near the kindergarten, it needs to stop. I've made my position clear. If you continue showing up uninvited around my family, I will have no choice but to involve the police. This is your only warning. I hit send and sat back, the weight of what I'd just done pressing heavily on me. There was no going back from this. This wasn't just setting a boundary. It was creating a wall that I was determined to keep standing. It didn't take long for their response to come. But it wasn't an email. It was a barrage of text messages from Mom, each one more desperate than the last. How could you do this to us, Lillian? We're your parents. Don't you understand? We might not have much time left. All we want is to know our grandchildren before it's too late. I could feel the manipulation creeping in, just like old times. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. I blocked her number, but then Dad's messages started coming in. I could almost feel his desperation in every word. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. We're not criminals, Lillian. We're family. Think about what you're doing to us in our final years. The guilt trip was wearing thin. I didn't even hesitate as I blocked his number too. I didn't need to hear any more. Then one last message came through. It was longer than the others, more calculated. We've been thinking, Lillian. If you let us see the children, we'll change our will. Everything will go to you, the house, the lake cottage, all of it. You were right before. We'll make it right. Just let us be grandparents to your children. I read those words over and over, my stomach twisting. The audacity, the complete lack of understanding about what had happened, about how much damage they had done, not just to me, but to Lucas as well. They still thought they could buy their way into my life, my children's lives. And what about Lucas? What about his life, his family, his future? I thought about those family dinners again, the endless praise they'd heaped on him, how he was their perfect child, how they'd made me feel like I didn't matter. I thought about how they'd treated him when he finally cracked, when he became human and flawed, and how they had discarded him just like they had discarded me. James and I sat together that night after the kids had gone to bed, our mugs of tea growing cold between us. He didn't say anything for a while, just let me talk it out, the thoughts tumbling out of me like a flood. It's not just about the will, I said, feeling the weight of it all. It's not just about the inheritance. If we let them back in, if we accept this deal, they'll hold it over our heads forever. It'll always be a transaction. Let us see the kids, and we'll give you what you want. It's not right. James nodded, his face serious in the dim kitchen light. They'll always have that power over us. Today it's the kids and the inheritance. Tomorrow it could be something else, something worse. I took a deep breath, letting his words settle into me. The decision was made. That night I blocked their numbers on my phone, unfriended them on every social media platform, and deleted every email address they had. For a while, they tried to find ways around it. Letters started showing up in our mailbox, even a note sent to my work email. But eventually, like a storm running out of rain, their attempts to reach me faded away into nothing, and life went on. The twins started school. James got a promotion at work. I began freelancing from home during their nap times, carving out my own space. We were happy, truly happy. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was real. We lived in our quiet, drama-free bubble, but I never let my guard down completely. Even when things were peaceful, a small part of me always wondered if they'd show up again, trying to tear down the walls I had so carefully built. End of Part 3 ban John Noy. Part 4. Must be consistent. Natural language. Everything logical together. Remember natural language like Native Americans. ChatGPT, John Noy. Part 4. The past never truly lets go. I thought I had finally left it all behind. My parents, the hurt, the years of trying to earn love that was never truly mine to begin with. For the first time in my life, I felt free from that toxic loop. But life, as it always seems to, had a way of reminding me that the past doesn't always stay where it belongs. It happened one morning, on a random Tuesday. I was in the kitchen, getting the twins ready for school. Their laughter filled the house, their little voices arguing over whose crayon was the best as they colored in their latest masterpieces. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess. I was used to it by now, the rhythm of our life. But as I was standing at the counter, stacking plates to clean up after breakfast, I heard it. The doorbell. I froze for a second, my heart skipping a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward the door, already knowing who it was. Even before I opened it, I could feel it in my bones. The weight of the past was knocking again. And sure enough, when I opened the door, there they were, my parents standing on the porch, looking like they hadn't aged a day since the last time I saw them. "Lillian," Mom said, her voice trembling, "we've missed you so much." It was the same line she'd said years ago, but now it felt hollow, fake. I stepped back, not letting them in, keeping the door slightly ajar as I stared at them. My mind raced, trying to figure out what they wanted this time. I'd put up my boundaries. I'd made it clear. Why were they here again? Dad tried to ease the tension. "We just want to see our grandchildren. We've waited long enough." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. See our grandchildren? After everything they had done, after the way they had treated me, the way they had treated Lucas, now they were acting like we were all a big happy family again? Why now? I asked, my voice steady but edged with bitterness. Why show up now after everything? Mom hesitated, her eyes flicking to Dad for support. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. "Something's happened, Lillian," Dad finally said, breaking the stillness. He sounded so defeated. "Sarah, she's been unfaithful to Lucas. We didn't know how bad it was until recently." The words hit me like a slap to the face. Sarah? Unfaithful? My brain struggled to process the information. I had known something was off with her, but to hear it like this? It didn't make sense. Not until they continued. "Lucas found out," Mom chimed in, her voice cracking with emotion. "And the kids, they're not his." I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to say anything. The perfect family facade had cracked wide open. The children that had been their pride and joy, the ones they'd used to justify everything, to justify writing me out of the will, weren't even their grandchildren. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to shout, to tell them how right I had been all along, but something held me back. It wasn't about being right. It was about everything that had come before. "And Lucas," Dad added, his voice full of regret, "he's infertile. He can't have children of his own." It was like a punch in the gut. The golden child, the one who had always been the perfect son, who could do no wrong. He couldn't even have children. And now, after everything, my parents were telling me that my twins, my children, were their only chance at having real grandchildren. I felt sick to my stomach. They'd spent years doting on Lucas's kids, plastering their lives all over social media. And now they were just going to erase them. They were erasing everything they had ever told me about family, about what mattered. "Do you hear yourselves?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. "Those kids loved you. They called you Grandma and Grandpa. And now, just because of a DNA test, you're going to pretend they never existed?" Mom was already crying, wiping her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her bag. "They're not family, Lillian," she said, almost too calmly. "Your children, though. They're our real grandchildren, our blood." My heart felt like it was breaking all over again. I had spent my whole life watching them pick Lucas over me, choosing him for everything, and now it was the same story, just with different players. My children were being used as pawns in some game I didn't want to play anymore. I stepped back from the door, the disgust rising in my chest. "You need to leave, right now." Dad started to protest, but I didn't want to hear it. "Get out," I repeated, my voice firmer now. "You don't get to walk back into my life after everything. My children don't need grandparents who can turn their love on and off like a light switch. You don't get to decide who's family when it's convenient for you." Dad's face turned red with anger, but Mom just looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Lillian, we're your parents," she said softly. "We just want a chance." "No," I cut her off, voice cold. "You don't get a chance. Not after everything. You can't just decide to be family when you feel like it." And then I closed the door. The finality of it hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the physical act of shutting them out. It was the emotional wall I had finally built, brick by brick. The door slammed shut, and with it, all the old wounds, the lies, the broken promises. I locked the door, leaned against it, and felt the weight of it settle over me. But this time it didn't break me. This time I was in control. I thought the worst of it was behind me, but in the weeks that followed, the reality set in. It wasn't just that they had shown up uninvited again. It was that they hadn't learned a single thing. It was like they thought they could keep playing the same old game, throwing money and gifts at me, trying to buy their way back into my life. But I had seen the truth of their love. It wasn't unconditional, it was transactional. After I blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media accounts, I thought they would eventually get the message. They didn't. The packages kept coming. Expensive toys, fancy clothes for the twins, even things like matching designer backpacks for school. It was as though they believed that if they could just pile enough gifts on me and my children, I would forget everything. Forget the years of neglect. Forget the hurt. Forget the way they had treated Lucas and me. Like we were nothing more than extras in their idealized family narrative, I took every single item and donated it. It didn't matter what it was. New toys, shiny clothes, none of it mattered. I wasn't going to let them buy their way into my life again. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history with a few overpriced trinkets. Then one morning, I saw Mom's car parked across the street. It was subtle at first, a quick glance, then a turn away like she wasn't sure if I'd see her, but it didn't take long for me to realize. She was watching us, watching my children, like I was still the little girl who could be manipulated into doing what they wanted. 2 days later, Dad was sitting on a bench near the playground at the twins' school, reading a newspaper, but I knew better. He wasn't there to read. He was there to watch. It was like some twisted game, a constant surveillance of my life. They never approached me directly. They never came to the door. They just lingered, waiting for me to let down my guard. It was creepy, exhausting, and I hated it. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't live in fear that they were always going to be lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to get in. I had to draw the line once and for all. No more games, no more manipulation. This had to stop. That evening, after another package arrived, I sat down at my laptop and wrote an email. I didn't want to make this personal. I didn't want to drag out the emotions anymore. I had to be firm. Mom and Dad, I've made it clear that you're no longer welcome in my life. Your gifts and your attempts to win me over are not appreciated. I have set boundaries, and if you continue to harass me and my family, I will be forced to take legal action. This is your final warning. The words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. It was like I had finally taken control. The message was clear, final, and there would be no more chances. I didn't expect them to listen. I didn't expect them to respect it, but I had to do it for myself, for my children, for my family. It wasn't long before their response came, but this time, it wasn't a calm message or a heartfelt apology. It was a barrage of texts from Mom, the same pattern, the same manipulative language I had heard so many times before. "Lillian, please don't do this. We're your parents. You're tearing our family apart. How can you be so cruel? We may not have much time left. You're all we have left." I let the texts sit there for a while, reading and rereading the words, trying to stay strong. I had to remember the truth. I had to remember everything they had done, the years of neglect, the way they had pushed me aside for Lucas, the way they had discarded me without a second thought, and when that guilt started to creep in, I blocked her number. Again, but it didn't stop there. Dad's texts started coming through. His words were more desperate, pleading, like a man who had lost everything. "You're breaking your mother's heart. She's not well, Lillian. You have to understand. We just want to be a family again. Please, for the sake of the grandchildren." The same emotional manipulation. The same twisted promises. They were trying to guilt me into submission, to make me feel like I was the villain here. But I knew better. I blocked his number too. Then, there it was. The final text. The one that pushed me over the edge. "If you let us see the children, we'll change the will. We'll give you everything. The house, the lake cottage, everything. You'll be set for life. Just let us be grandparents." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling disgust and pity swirling in my stomach. They still didn't get it. They still thought they could buy my love. They still thought they could bribe their way back into my life with stuff, with promises of money and property. And then I thought about Lucas, the brother who had lost everything, the wife, the children, the future he had worked so hard for. I thought about how my parents had discarded him just as easily as they had discarded me. Now they were willing to throw him aside completely, all because he didn't fit their idea of the perfect child. The second Lucas's life didn't align with their ideal family narrative, they were ready to erase him completely. I couldn't let them do that to him, to me, to my children, and I couldn't let them do it to themselves either. They had spent their lives building this image of perfection. But as soon as the cracks showed, as soon as their perfect little world came crashing down, they were ready to abandon anyone who no longer fit that narrative. That night, James and I sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of tea growing cold between us. We talked through everything again, for what felt like the 100th time. He never wavered, he understood, and that meant everything. "They'll always try to use the kids," James said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "They'll always try to use us. And if we let them back in now, they'll just use it against us later. They'll hold it over us forever." He was right. It wasn't just about the will. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about power, about them thinking they could still control me, still control my family. I wasn't going to let them, not now, not ever. The decision was made. I blocked their emails, I blocked their calls. I unfriended them on every social media platform. For a while, they tried to get through. Letters started showing up in our mailbox. Mom even tried to reach me through my work email, but eventually, their attempts faded away, like a storm that had run out of rain. The silence returned, and this time it wasn't oppressive. This time, it was peaceful. Life went on. The twins grew, and with them, our family found a rhythm I had never thought was possible. James got a promotion. I started freelancing, working from home, building a life that was just ours. There were no more guilt trips, no more unwanted visits, no more playing the same old games. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly free, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away. It's strange how life can twist and turn. Just when you think you've finally found peace, something can come out of nowhere and force you to revisit the past. But I had learned one thing over the years. The past doesn't have to control you. You don't have to let it define you. And sometimes, even the hardest moments can lead to something good, something real. About a year after I cut off my parents, I had come to a place where I felt comfortable with the decisions I had made. My little family, James, the twins, and I, had found a rhythm, a real sense of belonging that I never thought I'd experience. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Every day, I watched my children grow, their laughter filling the house, and I promised myself I would never let them feel the kind of neglect I had experienced. I was going to love them, support them, and show them what real family meant. But one random day, just like before, the past showed up at my doorstep. I was at home, getting the twins ready for their soccer practice when my phone buzzed. It wasn't an unknown number this time. It was Lucas. "Lillian, can we meet? I need to talk to you." My heart skipped. It had been years since I had heard from him. I never expected this. I thought, after everything, we were both done with the family drama. But I knew deep down it wasn't that simple. People don't just walk away from decades of history without something lingering. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown. I hadn't seen him since that final dinner, the night everything had fallen apart. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this was important. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Lucas, my older brother, the golden child, looked nothing like the polished, perfect version I remembered. He seemed real, tired, raw. His eyes weren't filled with pride or superiority anymore. They were filled with something else, something human. We sat down at a small table, and for the first time in a long while, there was silence between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. I waited for him to speak first, and when he did, his words came out in a rush, as though they'd been bottled up for years. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight. "For everything. For how I treated you. For how I let them treat you. For not standing up for you when I should have." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For years, I had carried around this resentment towards him. Resentment that he didn't understand what it was like to be in my shoes. Resentment that he had been the favored one, the one who could do no wrong. But sitting across from him now, hearing the pain in his voice, I realized that maybe I had been wrong too. "I didn't see it," he continued, his voice shaky. "I didn't see how bad it was, how much they put you down, how much they made you feel like you didn't matter. I was so caught up in being their perfect son, I never saw how much it hurt you." My heart softened, just a little. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but hearing him admit it, seeing him take responsibility, felt like something I hadn't even realized I needed. "I'm not talking to them anymore," Lucas said, staring into his coffee. "I cut them off after I found out about the will. It wasn't even about the money. It was about how easily they could throw me away when things didn't go as planned. 35 years of being their perfect son, and as soon as I wasn't the perfect version of myself anymore, they were ready to disinherit me. Just like that." I nodded, understanding all too well. I had lived it too. "The last time I went to their house," Lucas continued, his voice cracking, "all the pictures were gone, all the ones of the kids, all the memories they had put on display. They were gone. I asked Mom about it and she told me she burned them, like they were nothing." I felt a chill run through me. My mind flashed back to all those years of family gatherings, to the countless photos Mom had arranged in frames, always perfectly placed. And now they were gone, erased, just like that. "I don't even care about the will anymore," Lucas said quietly. "It's not about the money. It's about what they did, how they treated us, and how they could just erase everything." I looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't the man I had grown up with. The image of Lucas, the one I had always resented for being the perfect son in my parents' eyes, was gone. The man sitting across from me now was broken, just like I had been. He was someone who had been hurt, just like me. He had been their golden child, and now he had been discarded in the same way. We sat in silence for a while, both of us just trying to process everything. But then Lucas looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Lillian," he said again, this time with more weight in his voice. "I finally get it. I understand now what you went through, what it feels like to be on the outside. I wish I had seen it sooner. I didn't know how to respond at first. I didn't know if I was supposed to forgive him or if I was supposed to be angry to remind him of all the times he had been part of the problem. But what I realized in that moment was that I didn't need to forgive him for everything, because he wasn't the one who had hurt me. He had been a victim of it too. "I get it," I said quietly, my voice soft. "I really do. But it's not just about us anymore. It's about what we want for ourselves, for our families. We've been given a chance to build something different, something better. And that's what we did. For the first time in a long time, we talked honestly, without the barriers of family expectations or the weight of old resentments. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We left that cafe with no promises of immediate change, no grand gestures. But we left with something more valuable than that, the possibility of a real relationship. A relationship built on honesty, respect, and understanding. As I drove home that day, my mind was full of new thoughts. Thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to have before. Maybe there was hope. Maybe there was room in my life for healing, for growth. Not just with Lucas, but with everything. My parents, the pain, the past. It didn't have to define me anymore. I had my own family now, and I was going to build it on my terms. As I walked into my house, the sound of the twins' laughter filled the air, and I realized that this was where I belonged. This was my family, the one I had chosen. And no one could take that away from me. Story 2. My name is Chloe, and I was 14 when my parents got divorced. It wasn't one of those dramatic splits you see in movies, no hurling clothing out of windows or yelling contests. Only 2 individuals decided they could no longer make it work. Mom began dating again almost immediately after Dad moved several states away. That's how Richard entered our life. At first, Richard appeared to be a decent person. He had a good job at some corporate firm, dressed well, and made my mom laugh. However, there was something unsettling about the way he gazed at me, right from the start, not in a spooky manner. Worse, in a judging way, as if I were some sort of issue that required his attention. "Your daughter needs some direction." I overheard him telling Mom one evening, maybe a month after he moved in. "She's at that challenging age." Mom's response made my stomach turn as I was standing in the hallway. "I am aware. I'm so delighted you're here to help." But it wasn't help. With a smile that never quite made it to his eyes, it was criticism cloaked in phony care. Little remarks about my hair or clothes were made at first. Then it escalated. I recall the first time he truly affected me. About 6 months after he and his mother were married, it happened over dinner. I was dressed in brand new pants that I had purchased with my allowance. "Chloe, those jeans are starting to fit you a little snug." Halfway to his lips, Richard paused his fork and spoke. "You're growing so rapidly." Then he muttered something loud enough for me to hear. "Primarily." Tears were on the verge of streaming down my cheeks. "This is how they should fit," I was able to say. "Oh, sweetheart." Mom got right in. "Richard is just worried about your well-being. You know how teenagers can sometimes not notice these things? That was the trend. When Richard would say something hurtful under the pretext of care, Mom would support him. She would shake her head and claim I was being overly sensitive each time I tried to express how his remarks affected me. "You need to learn to take a joke, Chloe." She would say that while Richard sat there grinning smugly. "He's only trying to watch out for you." After that, I called my dad more frequently. I was saved by our Skype conversations. He'd listen to me, truly listen, without attempting to explain away Richard's conduct or convince me I was overreacting. He continued to make regular alimony payments, which I later found to be more than adequate. However, the situation at home could not be resolved by money. With the birth of my half-brother, everything changed. I was 17, trying to focus on my final year of high school, while our house changed into what felt like a temple to Richard's ideal little family. Minus me, of course. Mom was very engrossed on the infant. I mean, I understand. He was little, adorable, and in need of continual care, but I seemed to have vanished into thin air overnight. Only until something went wrong did nobody appear to notice me. Like when I accidentally awakened the infant by closing my bedroom door too loudly. I anticipated Richard to grow worse when the kid was delivered, to find even more ways to criticize me. However, an unforeseen event occurred. He started traveling for business a lot. My redemption came from those business travels. When he was gone, the house felt lighter, like if I could breathe again. Mom even appeared more at ease. My senior year went better than I had anticipated, despite the fact that she was always counting down the days until his return, because Richard was abroad so often. I joined the yearbook committee, concentrated on my schoolwork, and began planning for college. Actual plans. Not simply getaway fantasies. Dad maintained his word, and showed there on graduation day. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, he was sitting in the audience, grinning proudly. Mom was also present, Richard and the baby, of course. However, I searched the throng for my father's face. My father took me aside after the wedding. "Chloe, I meant what I said earlier." With his hands on my shoulders, he informed me, "You can attend any college you like. I'll see it through. You deserve it." In the hopes that at least one institution would accept me, I had previously applied to a number of them. They all did, which surprised me. However, I was certain of the one I want, the one in the city of Dad. I would not have to return home frequently because it was far away. However, near enough to someone who genuinely looked out for me. I didn't tell Mom and Richard until after supper. The table was where we were seated. Richard grumbled about the aeroplane meals from his most recent trip as Mom fed my brother. Every college I applied to accepted me. During a little period of stillness, I remarked, "I'm going to take Marshall University's offer." In midair, Mom passed the baby spoon. "That is. Isn't that your father's residence?" I nodded, anticipating their response. "Well," Richard said, his face breaking into that recognizable sarcastic grin, "it appears that your father was able to pay for college and do something worthwhile with his life at last. Who would have guessed?" I clenched my fork so tightly that my knuckles went white. It was nearly impossible to resist the impulse to lash out at him and express my thoughts about his valuable contribution to my life, but I restrained my tongue. I didn't want to give him the gratification of watching me lose my calm. Mom gave a little sigh of relief that sounded eerily familiar. Perhaps she was relieved that I was finally out of her way, so she could concentrate on her own family without having to deal with the awkward reminder of her former marriage. I packed as much as I could into a bag and 2 luggage the next morning. Richard had already departed for work, and Mom was too preoccupied with the baby to see me dragging my stuff downstairs. After Dad made arrangements for a car service to come get me, I found myself standing in front of his lovely 2-story colonial home with a wraparound porch that evening. Compared to the small house I had left behind, it was completely different. However, it was the warmth that really got to me, not simply the size. Dad was waiting at the door with his fiancée, Sarah. I had not anticipated her. She had vivid red hair, paint, and clothes that were soiled, and she was younger than her mother. She hugged me tightly, as if we had been friends for ages. She grabbed one of my suitcases and said, "We have your room ready." I may have gone a little too far with the decorations, if that's okay with you. The space was ideal. It had a window seat that looked out onto the backyard and was serene and elegant. Mel baby weeping. Criticism from Mel Richard. Mel is being cautious, just tranquilly. That evening, after seeing my note, Mom called. She seemed offended and replied, "You could have said goodbye properly. Your brother was seeking for you all day. He's too motherly. He won't remember my presence." Soon enough, during those initial weeks, I adjusted to my new existence, learning more about Sarah. She had a way of making everyone feel at ease while teaching art at the nearby high school. We would speak about everything and nothing while occasionally sipping hot chocolate late into the night. Dad offered to help me out totally, but I wanted to be on my own. The Daily Grind, a bustling cafe close to the house, is where I got a job. Although it wasn't a glamorous job, I liked it. My teammates were entertaining, the usual clients were kind, and the tips were reasonable. I moved into Marshall University's dormitories in the autumn. My roommate, Jenny, was a music major from Chicago who studied violin at weird hours but always brought me coffee. I was studying business administration and was enjoying my lessons when she returned from her early morning rehearsals. I worked at the cafe in between lectures and study sessions. A year passed like this, and I was happy. Really happy, until one typical Tuesday afternoon at the cafe altered everything. I was cleaning tables when I heard a familiar laugh, one that made my stomach plummet. There at a corner table sat Richard, but he wasn't alone and he clearly wasn't on a business trip. He was with a lady I'd never seen before, and they were kissing like adolescents on a first date. "Lisa, hello." I tried not to shake my voice as I whispered to my coworker, "Could you please take table 12? I must go take a rest." With my pulse racing through the little window in the door, I ducked into the rear room. They were still visible to me. As I took out my phone and began recording, my hands were shaking. Richard was holding the woman's hand across the table now, looking at her the way he used to gaze at Mom in the early days, when they finally departed. I was still lurking in the rear when Lisa discovered me. What was the purpose of that? With a worried expression, she questioned, "Were those individuals familiar to you? The guy?" I spoke slowly. "He is someone I know. I simply didn't want him to see that I was employed here. Do you know who the woman was?" Lisa's eyes lighted up with gossip. "God, oh God. Indeed, Catherine Morrison is that person. Everyone is familiar with her. Because of her business success and charitable endeavors, she is frequently featured in the local press. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't get the picture of Richard kissing that woman out of my head. My fingers shaking, I reached for my laptop at midnight and opened social media, typing Catherine Morrison into the search box. Her profile appeared right away, complete with a verified check mark. Richmond Technologies CEO. I read aloud to myself in the darkness of my dorm room. Richard was employed by the same company. He was seeing Catherine Morrison, but she wasn't just any woman. She was the director of the entire firm and his employer. There was more to his affair than that. He was having an affair with his own boss. I browsed down her timeline, and that's when things got worse, much worse. Richard appeared in one picture after another. Him at business functions. At what appeared to be vacation locations, he was always standing close to Catherine while the other staff members kept a respectful distance. Both of them were smiling at the camera as he held the young child, who was about 3 years old. One especially upsetting picture included the message, "My 2 favorite men in the world? I am eager to make it official as soon as possible. Happy family engagement." I continued scrolling and the evidence kept building. There were pictures from years and years ago. Richard's numerous business travels. Mom was at home by herself with my brother throughout all of those occasions. He had been creating an entirely different life, replete with a second child. As I began saving the pictures one by one, my hands were trembling so much that I nearly dropped my phone. I downloaded every one of them, even the caption screenshots. Richard was there for what appeared to be the boys' birthday celebration. Christmas supper with Richard and Catherine. On a swing, Richard pushes the youngster. One shot in particular made me pause. It showed Richard, Catherine, and their kid at a funfair around 6 months earlier. It said in the caption, "Sometimes the perfect family comes when you least expect it." I am very grateful that my Prince Charming waited patiently for the ideal time to begin our family. At last, true love was meant to be. Patient enough to wait. He was not waiting. He'd been lying. Living 2 very different lives. Juggling 2 families like some weird circus performance. Furthermore, it appears from Catherine's writings that she was unaware that she was the other lady. With her attractive subordinate who had captured her heart, she genuinely thought she had discovered her happily ever after. My thoughts were racing as I reclined in my chair. The Richard in these photos was so different from the man I knew. Here he was, smiling, real grins, not the smirks. He gave me everything. He appeared to be truly happy. Hugging his hidden fiancée, playing with his secret son, and going about his secret existence. I muttered to my lonely room, "Oh, Mom, how has he affected us?" It was almost 3 a.m. when I checked the time. Sleep was the last thing on my mind, but I had an early class tomorrow. I had to make sure that all of the evidence was stored. This would have to be shown to Mom. Even though it would be detrimental to all parties, the truth had to be revealed. I was on the train, going home, a week later. My gut was in knots, and the proof was still burning a hole in my phone. I hadn't disclosed my destination to my father. He wouldn't have understood why I needed to do this. When Mom answered the door, her expression was one of genuine surprise. "We didn't expect you, Chloe." For a brief while, my younger brother's tottering around her legs seemed almost natural. Richard then emerged from behind them. He responded, "Well, well." His voice was already beginning to take on that familiar tone of mockery. "Don't tell me you have to return home after being expelled from college due to poor marks." Mom chuckled as if that were the most hilarious joke she had ever heard. "Stop it, Richard. Chloe is doing well at school, is I right, honey?" I made an effort to grin. "In fact, I'm on the dean's list." "You are, of course." Richard looked me up and down and grinned. "Say that each time I see you, those jeans become bigger and bigger. Is it the new style now? The loose appearance. I bet my tongue I'd truly lost weight since entering college. I had learned a lot from all those cooks who were rushing around the cafe. However, Richard was always making fun of my appearance. Every time I moved during the day, the remarks persisted. Richard always had something to say when I talked. It worsened when Mom brought dinner. As I placed some mashed potatoes on my plate, he said, "Well there, Chloe." For the rest of us, save some, I continued to eat in silence while keeping a sidelong glance at him. Just last week, same man who was sitting here making fun of me had been playing happy families with his employer. Another life, another child. The same man. Sweetheart. He turned to face his mother with a worried, inflated look. "We may need to purchase a second refrigerator if Chloe plans to visit more frequently." Mom laughed and looked at him so lovingly that my chest ached. In fact, she didn't know. With all the evidence of his treachery on it, my phone felt heavy in my pocket. "Shall I show her?" Observing her expression, so devoted to this man who had been deceiving her for years. I paused. Still unsure of what to do, I went upstairs to my former room after supper. However, I was halted on the steps by Richard's voice. "Where are you going, in your opinion?" Confused, I turned around. "To my chamber." "Your space?" He chuckled. "Now that's my office. Months ago, we converted it." "Your mother told you, didn't she? My brother was being bounced on Mom's hip when she came into the corridor." "Oh, I should have mentioned it. I can take a nap on the sofa." I tried to sound steady as I offered. Richard gave a headshake. "You will obstruct the path. Tonight, you'd better return to university." I glanced at my mother, hoping she would disagree and defend my suggestion of an alternative. Rather, she simply nodded. "Richard is correct, my dear. You would be better off finding another place to stay tonight. Something broke inside of me. Perhaps it was the way my mother avoided looking at me. Perhaps it was the arrogant look on Richard's face. But I'd had enough." "Why do you always do this?" My voice trembled as I turned to face my mother. "You always side with him, but why? See how he treats me, don't you? How has he consistently handled me?" Mom seemed uneasy as she moved my brother to her other hip. "You're being dramatic, Chloe. Richard simply enjoys making jokes. You've been overly sensitive all along." "Make jokes." I laughed resentfully. Is that considered continual ridicule? The remarks regarding my life, my clothes, and my weight. "Mom, he despises me. I've always been disliked by him. Furthermore, you have never defended me." With that uncontrollable smile remaining on his face, Richard took a step forward. "Let's not let this become another one of your adolescent outbursts, Chloe. Quit talking." I took out my phone with shaky hands. "You are no longer allowed to speak." I brought the first picture up to his face after pulling it up. It had an instant impact. His cheeks lost all of their color. "What is that?" Mom looked at the screen and inquired, "Richard? What's the matter? Do you want to tell your mother about the types of work travels you have been going on?" I go on to the next picture. His other son in the picture. Or perhaps you want to share your fiancé with her, your boss at Richmond Technologies, you know, the one with whom you are parents. Mom's jaw dropped. I could hear the wall clock ticking since the room was so silent. That's not the case. Finally, losing his smile, Richard stuttered. Not what? These pictures are not of your son. Catherine Morrison is not being kissed by you, not the 2-week-old news of your engagement. I looked at my mother. For years, he has been leading a double life. Mom, he has gone on several business travels with his other family members, his other son, and to arrange his wedding to a woman who is unaware that he is already married. You're telling lies. Mom seldom spoke above a whisper. I wish I was. With his employer, he has been unfaithful to you. Together, they have a 3-year-old boy. She believes they will be married and that he is not dating. Quit! My brother started weeping when Mom screamed. Put an end to these terrible falsehoods. You dare? You have no right to fabricate such horrible tales about Richard. I have evidence, Mom. Examine the pictures. Examine the dates. Take a look. Nothing is worth looking at. Richard has always been loathed by you. You have consistently attempted to obstruct us. He's a greater parent to your brother than your own father was to you, and that's why you're envious. Her remarks were like a blow to my head. She rushed to the front door, ripped it open, and flung my backpack onto the front yard while I stood there in disbelief. Leave now. She was in tears. Right now. Anger flushed her face. Get out of our house. I don't want to hear any more of your falsehoods. I walked toward the door, my legs feeling like lead. As I passed Richard, I saw his smile was returned wider than ever. He leaned close as I passed, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Your mother will always believe me over you, Chloe. Remember that. I spent the whole train trip back to university in a haze, my mother's comments repeating in my thoughts. The next morning, after a restless night, I opened my laptop and headed to Catherine Morrison's social media page. My cursor hovered over the message button for a long moment before I finally clicked. Miss Morrison, I have some crucial information regarding your fiancé that you need to know. Would you be willing to meet in person? Within an hour, she responded about Richard. Naturally. Is everything all right? At the daily grind, we decided to meet. It was, oddly, her proposal. She was unaware that I was employed there or that I had initially learnt of her presence at that particular cafe. I came early for my duty, changed into my outfit, and waited. At exactly 2 p.m., Catherine Morrison strolled through the door. Catherine. I approached her table. My name is Chloe. Her grin seemed genuine, warm even. Please sit down. You looked worried in your message. What's this about? Richard? I inhaled deeply. Before I show you something, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I truly am. Her grin faltered. Sorry about what? I picked out my phone and accessed the photo album. This is my mum, I said, presenting her a recent family photo. And here is Richard, her spouse, my stepfather. Catherine gazed at the photo. Her perfectly manicured hand freezes halfway to her coffee cup. I don't get it. My mother and him had been wed for many years. Together they have a 2-year-old boy, my younger brother. I move my finger to another picture. It was taken during Christmas. No. She gave a head shake. No. That isn't feasible. Richard does not have a spouse. According to him, he has never been married. In the spring, we will tie the knot. We have a son. I am aware of your son, I said softly. And I know Richard told you he was single. He has been leading 2 separate lives. Husband and father in one city, fiancé and father in another. Her coffee grew cold as she sat in quiet for a long time. After all this time, she eventually confided to his ailing mother about all those business trips home. He was returning home to his other child, his wife. She chuckled bitterly. God, what an idiot I am. I made him regional director and gave him 3 promotions. I believed that he loved me. I apologized once again, since I had run out of things to say. Don't be. She straightened her spine, CEO mask falling back into place. Thank you for telling me the truth. I now realize that he was only taking advantage of my power and position. She rose up, gathered her stuff. I have some calls to make, if you don't mind. Thank you. Chloe. Really? With her heels tapping on the floor, I watched her leave the cafe. She held her head high. Despite everything, Compared to my mother, she was stronger. I believed she was capable of facing reality. My phone rang a week after Catherine and I had met. It was Mum, and she was yelling before I could even greet her. "Are you content now?" Her voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Are you finally satisfied? Everything is damaged by you." "What, Mom?" "They let him go. His employer, that lady. She caused him to lose his job. They discovered infractions after auditing all of his work. He's getting thousands of dollars from them. His career is finished." Her words came in short gasps, and now she was crying. "He will never be hired again by any reputable company, and you are solely to blame." With my legs suddenly weak, I sat down on my bed in my dorm room. "He was unfaithful to you, Mom. He had a different family, a kid. He intended to wed her." "You have no understanding," she interrupted me. "He's the finest thing that ever happened to me. Your sibling deserved no better parent. How dare you try to destroy that? You two were being used by him, Catherine and you. All he was doing was using everyone to his advantage. Can't you see that? You have no right to discuss him in such a manner." Her tone became icy. "I love this man more than anything in the world, and you have no right to judge him. Please, Mom, I don't have a daughter." They sounded like bullets. "From my perspective, you are no longer there." The call went dead. I sat there looking at my phone for a long time, tears pouring down my face. When Jenny returned from class, she discovered me in that state. "What happened, Chloe?" "Oh my God." I told her everything. She held me while I cried, brought me tea, and helped me call Dad. That evening, he and Sarah came up to see how I was doing. "You did the right thing." Sarah held my hand and continued to speak. "Sometimes the right thing hurts like hell, but that doesn't make it wrong." A year has passed since then. I continue to work at the cafe and maintain good marks at Marshall University. Dad and Sarah got married in a simple ceremony by the lake. It was beautiful. I was also the maid of honor for them. Sarah is expecting a child. I will shortly get a younger sibling. Through common acquaintances back home, I learn about Mom and Richard. He was never hired by another corporation. News of the audit results spread. He started drinking heavily, picking fights in bars. Mom had to get a job at the local supermarket to support them. My little brother is in daycare now because they can't afford a nanny like they used to. I sometimes question if I should feel bad about not being able to sleep. Perhaps everyone would have been better off if I had remained silent. Mom would still be happy in her ignorance. Richard would continue to work. My brother would have a more solid household. But then I recall Richard's smile as Mom tossed me out his muttered comments. "I will always be trusted by your mother more than you are." I recall all the years he spent subtly hurting me, manipulating me, and twisting everything to make me feel insignificant. No, I don't feel sorry for them. The truth is like that. Sometimes it doesn't care about convenience or comfort. It just is. Richard built his life on lies, and he had only himself to blame when those lies eventually came to an end. Story 3. My name is Grace, and I shared a little 2-story Minneapolis home with my parents, Lisa and Robert, for 18 years. We weren't the sort of family that had movie nights or went on exciting trips, but I believed it was just how my parents were: realistic, quiet, focused on work and everyday routines. Mom spent her evenings with a calculator and spreadsheets since she was an accountant. Dad worked in sales and was always on the phone, making presentations or completing agreements. They took care of me, fed and dressed me, and assisted me with my schoolwork when I inquired. However, this gap persisted. No hugs. "I adore you now." Look around with the same casualness that I seen in other households. I reminded myself that not all families needed to be overly sentimental to be happy. It was just their way. Grace. "After supper, honey, we must speak." On the morning of my 18th birthday, Mom stated. Although she spoke in an unusually serious tone, I didn't give it much thought. But perhaps they had something special in store. Birthdays had never really been a big thing to them previously. I ate what was left of my birthday meal that evening while sitting at our kitchen table. Pizza to go. My decision. Dad was obviously thinking about something, as he kept checking his phone while Mom hardly touched her slice. At last, Dad put down his phone and talked to Grace. Since today is your 18th birthday, it's time for your mother and I to tell you about the plans we've been working on for some time. I woke up anticipating a surprise present or possibly some news concerning college preparations. What happened next? Like a bucket of freezing water hit me. The house is for sale, Mom said bluntly. We are relocating to Europe with your father. We intend to launch our own company. There. As I waited for the punchline, I looked at them. Oh, I see. When do we depart? I mean, I'll have to find out how to apply to colleges. Not a bit of elegance. Mom interrupted me. She spoke sharply. We're on the go. You won't accompany us? What are you saying? I spoke in a little childish voice. I don't get it. You are now 18, Dad clarified, as though he were talking about a commercial deal. An adult. You need to take care of yourself now. With my head unable to comprehend what I was hearing, I leaped between them. What about college, though? In a few months, I'm expected to begin. We have been discussing it. Mom got up to clear the plates and remarked, That's your job now. You've been a burden for so long, Grace, to be honest. For 18 years, we provided you with food, clothing, and support. That's more than sufficient. The words were a weight, like physical blows. My eyes began to well up with tears after all these years, but as if she hadn't just destroyed my entire world, Mom just kept loading the dishwasher. Until we sell the house, you are welcome to remain here. Dad's tone indicated that this was a nice offer of some sort. However, everyone will benefit the sooner you resolve your own predicament. As my parents talked over my head about real estate values and the hassles of moving, I sat there dumbfounded. 18 years of recollections suddenly altered, transformed. Every quiet meal, every school performance skipped, every quick victory in lieu of a hug. There were no indications of constraint or a shift in parenting approaches. These were indications that my parents had been eagerly awaiting my departure. I felt like I had been struck by a vehicle when I woke up the next morning. As I dialed Grandma Eleanor's phone, my hands were shaking. I felt a bit less lost when she answered the second call with her kind voice. Gracie? Is everything okay, sweetheart? You never make such an early call. I could barely get the words out, but nevertheless, I managed to tell her everything. The birthday supper. Their announcement. With every detail, my mother calls me a burden. On the opposite end of the queue, I could hear Grandma's breathing becoming labored. They are absolute. She spoke something to herself. It was something I had never heard her utter. Then, with more force, Gracie, pack your luggage. Right now, you're moving in with me. I didn't require 2 reminders. I took my biggest bag from the attic and began packing everything I could think of, including my laptop, clothing, pictures, and the few jewelry items I had. I could hardly zip the suitcase shut because my hands were shaking so much. Mom and Dad were still discussing real estate valuations downstairs. When I carried my bag past them and out the door, they hardly raised their heads. Goodbye now. I had no doubts about my destination. Nothing. Grandma was waiting on her front porch when I pulled into her driveway. She gave me one of her bear embraces, the type I'd always wanted to give my mother, and ushered me into the warm house I'd been to so many times. Among glasses of her renowned hot chocolate topped with extra marshmallows, Grandma outlined her strategy just as she had when I was a child. First things first, with a tone that left no room for debate, she said, "You're going to college. My savings will go a long way towards paying for my grandchild's education. Grandma, I can't take your money. Nothing is being taken by you. I'm going to give it." She squeezed my hand as she reached across the table, and there's something else you should know. I'm altering my will. Startled, I glanced up. Grandma had a fierce look on her face. My savings, this house. Gracie, everything is going to you. Don't give your mother a dime. Although it's not much, this residence is paid for. Although not millions, the savings are plenty. It'll all be yours. Grandma made one more point later that night as we were sitting in her little but spotless living room. We need to agree on something, Gracie, she stated gently. I think it's better if we keep the details of all this between ourselves. The rest of the family doesn't need to hear about your personal problems." I nodded, instantly understanding. In any case, I don't want to discuss it. Grandma patted my hand and said, "Good. Allow them to think as they like. We know the truth, and that's what matters." The routine of college life became comfortable. Grandma's humming in the kitchen and the aroma of her coffee would greet me every morning. Before I left for my courses, we would have breakfast together. In the evenings, I would share my day with her while she worked on her crossword puzzles. Sometimes family members would stop by to see grandmother. Aunt Sarah mentioned in passing on one such visit. "Did you hear? At last, Lisa and Robert arrived in Europe. Start a company of some sort there." I understand. I simply nodded and left to go study. I was not interested in learning more. The remarks about my independence were more difficult to take. They frequently arrived with such awe that I wanted to yell. During one visit, Uncle Mike said, "You're such a strong young woman, Grace. Moving out on your own and taking control of your life. Very responsible of you. Your decision to go it alone is admirable." Rachel, a cousin, added her voice. "Not all people your age would choose to live independently rather than with their parents." I would always fake a grin and shift the conversation. Getting the story straight away was easy. My parents' ambitious, self-reliant daughter had moved out immediately after high school because she was so ready to do it alone, letting everyone believe it was simpler. It was too painful to tell the truth. Then my life's worst day arrived. Grandma had been experiencing fatigue for weeks, but we both dismissed it as the natural aging process. It was already too late when we discovered it was more than that. The doctor used terms like advanced stage and aggressive. Before I knew it, I was in a hospital room with her, holding her hand while I watched her disappear. "You're the finest thing that ever happened to me, Gracie," she muttered one night, her voice shaky but her eyes clear. Never lose sight of it. A year prior to my graduation, she passed away 3 months later. The funeral was small but highly attended by family. Everyone, with the exception of my parents, arrived. Aunt Sarah told me that while they had been notified, they were unable to return from Europe at such short notice. The next year, I graduated with honors, holding my diploma tightly and fighting back tears since the one person I wanted to see cross the platform was not present, but I was ready for anything, thanks to my grandmother. Even the fact that she wasn't there. Thanks to her generosity, I had alternatives. After I got a job at Preston & Associates, an investment business, I utilized some of the inheritance to purchase a beautiful flat near downtown. I made the decision to rent out her house instead. I couldn't live there without her, but I also couldn't bear to sell it. Life has a strange way of shocking you when you least expect it. I met James that way. At Preston & Associates, he entered the incorrect conference room in search of a rescheduled client meeting. Instead, he discovered me with empty coffee cups and strewn papers as I was getting ready for a presentation. He pointed at my confusion and remarked, "Either this isn't the Thompson meeting, or they've really changed their marketing strategy." I couldn't help but chuckle next door. "At least you've discovered someone who enjoys a good coffee addiction, though." After one coffee date turned into another, we were spending all of our free time together. No one I had ever met was like James. Kind, sincere, and very patient. He simply held me and listened when I eventually told him about my parents one evening, not attempting to make things better or give you meaningless platitudes that you didn't deserve. He wiped away my tears and stated that. None of it. James took me to supper at the restaurant where we had our first date, a year and a half after that mistaken turn into my conference room. He fidgeted with his serviette and checked his pocket every few minutes, as if he was nervous all evening. When dessert came, I discovered a beautiful diamond ring tucked away next to my chocolate soufflé, strewn all over our table by the candlelight. His voice trembled a little as he replied, "I want to start a family with you. A genuine one that is full of all the love you ought to have had all along." I answered yes to happy tears, and for the first time in years, I felt totally, completely entire. The next day, I shared a photo on social media, my hand with the ring, James holding me from behind, saying yes to eternity with my closest friend. My heart felt like it may explode as I wrote it. The mail showed up in my inbox 2 days later. My stomach lurched as my mother's name appeared. "Your father and I just saw your amazing news, dearest Grace. We are so very pleased for you. We've been regretting how we treated you for years, but we know we have no right to ask. We never go a day without reflecting about our awful errors. We'd love to attend to your engagement celebration to attempt to make apologies. We understand if you say no, but we miss you so much. Love, Parents." I gazed at the message until the words blurred. When James arrived home, I showed it to him, my hands quivering. "What are your thoughts?" Hating how little my voice sounded, I asked. James read the message twice. He put his arm over my shoulders. "I believe it's totally up to you. However, if they had actually changed, if they genuinely apologize, perhaps they should be given the opportunity to prove it." I considered what my grandmother might say. She would probably advise me to follow my instincts but exercise caution. "All right," I spoke to myself in a whisper rather than to James. "One opportunity," I replied with a brief message. "Next Saturday at 7 o'clock is the party date. To start the conversation, you can arrive at 6. As I was getting ready that Saturday night, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I was left alone to deal with my parents after James kissed my cheek and squeezed my shoulder before leaving to pick up the catering. It was precisely 6 o'clock when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I saw them standing there, Dad in a sharp suit and Mum in an upscale dress. Despite having the same appearance, they appeared to be strangers. "Grace, darling." Mom moved forward for a clumsy embrace. I stood rigidly, allowing her to embrace me without giving it back. "You look wonderful, and what a lovely apartment." We moved to the living room, where they perched uncomfortably on the edge of my sofa. Dad commented on the decor. Mom asked about my job, both of them acting like we were destined acquaintances at a cocktail party rather than family. Then Dad cleared his throat, his pleasant expression dropping away like a mask. "Let's get right to the point, Grace. We know about your situation. My circumstances?" My stomach tightened. Indeed. Mom's eyes were keen as she leaned forward. "Grandma's inheritance is known to us. The savings, the house, everything. And we've done our research." "What research?" "The house is worth at least $300,000 in today's market." As if she were receiving a business presentation, she said. "And there must be a lot of savings knowing Mom. Plus, we see you're doing very well. Nice apartment, wealthy fiancé." "Get to the point," I said, my voice trembling. Dad made a firm announcement. "We want $70,000. It's less than we're entitled to, really. But we're being reasonable." I stared at them, speechless. Mom brought out a little notepad. "I've calculated everything. As Mom's daughter, I have a right to inherit. If you don't give us the money, we'll sue for half of everything. The house, the accounts, everything of it. You can't be serious," I muttered. "Oh, we are." Dad's voice sharpened. "And if you don't cooperate, we'll make sure everyone knows how you manipulated your grandmother, how you turned her against us, convinced her to cut out her own daughter." "I never do." "It doesn't matter what really happened," Mom interrupted. "What people will believe is what counts. Would you like your entire family to know how you plan to embezzle your grandmother's money? Watch your new in-laws to hear about it." The doorbell rang again early. Guests arriving. I stood up, feeling dizzy. I need time to think about this. Think quickly. Dad stood, adjusting his tie. We're hoping for a response shortly. James's parents entered just as they were leaving, all smiles and congratulations. I plastered on a fake smile and tried to focus on greeting guests, but my mind was spinning as the apartment filled with cheerful voices and laughter. I felt like I was watching everything from underwater. I was sitting at my kitchen table looking at my phone the morning after the engagement party. "Whatever you decide," James said to me as he held me tight before leaving for work. "I'm with you." My hands were steady this time as I dialed their number. Mom picked up on the first ring. "Have you decided yet?" "No." "Hi there? No chit-chat?" "Indeed." I inhaled deeply. "You won't get any money from me. Grandma made her choice, and I'm honoring it. You'll regret this." She snarled and hung up. They didn't spend any time. That evening, my phone started buzzing with notifications. My parents had written a lengthy statement on social media, complete with sad-faced emoticons and meticulously edited photographs of them looking upset. "Our hearts are breaking," the post read. "After losing everything in Europe, our home, our business, all our savings, we turned to our only daughter for help. But Grace, who is living in luxury with her affluent fiancé, refuses to aid her own parents. We are currently homeless and residing in different relatives' houses with no idea where we will sleep the following week. How did we raise such a heartless child?" Within hours, the post had been shared throughout our entire extended family. There were so many messages on my phone. "Grace, how could you? Your own parents. They reared you for 18 years. You have lots of money now. Why are you unable to assist them? Martha also called me crying. They need a place to stay. Grace, that house of your grandmother's is just sitting there with renters in it. It should be your own parents' home." Uncle Peter's message was particularly harsh. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. Your parents sacrificed everything for you." I wanted to scream, to be completely honest with them. However, every time I tried to reply, my throat felt constricted. The wedding cancellations followed. "I'm sorry, Grace, but I can't celebrate while your parents are suffering." Rachel, a cousin, texted. "What type of person starts a marriage by turning their back on family?" wrote a second relative. Uncle Mike, who had always been nice to me at family get-togethers, delivered the last blow. His message was professional and succinct. "Grace, as a lawyer, I am required to advise you that I will be defending your parents in their lawsuit against you about their grandmother's inheritance. Your grandmother's will may be challenged, and the law is clear about children's inheritance rights. Official documentation should be available shortly. I advise you to change your mind before things get out of hand. You don't want a court battle to begin your married life. Uncle Mike." As my entire extended family turned against me, I sat in my darkened flat, reading the messages over and over again. The irony was nearly comical. I was finally being recognized by them as the awful person my parents had always believed me to be, but for all the wrong reasons. James found me there when he got home. Still scrolling through the endless stream of accusations and disappointment, he took one look at my face and pulled me into his arms. I sat at my computer, fingers lingering over the keyboard. Taking a deep breath, I began to type. To my family and friends. I've stayed quiet for 8 years about what really happened between my parents and me. I let everyone believe their version of events because the reality was too painful to tell. But I'm at a loss now. On my 18th birthday, my parents sat me down and informed me they were selling our property and relocating to Europe. They told me they would not be bringing me along. "You've been a burden for 18 years, my mother remarked. That's more than sufficient. They refused to help with college, refused to support me in any way I was given until the household to figure out my own situation. They said I chose independence, but I didn't. I was left behind. That same evening, I was taken in by Grandma Eleanor. She provided me a home, paid for my schooling, and showed me what unconditional love really meant. My parents are now back, threatening to sue me for half of Grandma's inheritance and demanding $70,000. If I don't comply, they're threatening to ruin my reputation." But Grandma, being the wise woman she was, saw this coming. My hands were trembling when I posted the video clip beneath my post. Grandma's face filled the screen, looking tired but determined. Sitting in her hospital room, her lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was visible in the background. "Lisa," Grandma began addressing my mother directly. "You're attempting to take over what I left to Grace if you're viewing this. I anticipated that you would. I love you, and you are my daughter. But your greed has poisoned your heart. I, Eleanor Marie Sullivan, being of sound mind and clear judgment and recording this message in the presence of my attorney, I want to state explicitly why I've chosen to leave everything to my granddaughter. Grace, it was 8 years ago. You and Robert, to your own child. Away like she meant nothing. You refused to help with her education, refused to give her any support. You referred to her as a burden. A burden? Your own daughter, who I witnessed you deliver into this world. Grace kept your actions a secret from everyone. She kept her secret. Even when relatives praised you for raising such an independent daughter, she protected your reputation while you abandoned her. I'm leaving my house, my savings, and everything that I own to Grace. She demonstrated more character in her suffering than you have in your entire life, not because she manipulated me, as you will undoubtedly accuse me. As my only successor, my lawyer, Grace, saw my ultimate choice, which I made with full mental ability. That's all I have to say. Grandma's attorney confirmed the date and circumstances of the recording as the video came to a close. I added a final line to my post. In order to minimize family strife, I have respected Grandma's wishes and kept this film hidden for years. But now that my parents are threatening legal action and spreading lies, I have no choice but to share the truth. I'm sorry you all had to find out this way. With trembling fingers, I clicked post. The responses started flooding in. Within minutes after my post, Uncle Mike Gracetett made the initial call and his voice broke. I didn't know. I'm so sorry, my God. I am immediately leaving the case. What did they do to you? Then Aunt Sarah called, crying. That birthday dinner, I remember bringing you a gift the next week. But your parents said you'd moved out. Your independence seemed to make them very proud. How could they? The family group chat exploded with messages of shock, support, and apologies. Cousin Rachel, who'd canceled her RSVP just days ago, wrote a long message. I feel bad about criticizing you without knowing the facts. The picture your parents painted was so different. Please tell me it's not too late to attend the wedding. I want to be there to support you one by one. All the wedding cancellations were reversed. Family members who had denounced me just days before now extended their sincere regrets and offers of assistance. Even distant family members I barely knew sent messages expressing their shock and sympathy. Your place card will be waiting. I told each one. No harsh sentiments. Through the grapevine, I heard snatches about my parents. They had taken transitory jobs here and there while living with some old college pals. Mom was doing bookkeeping for small businesses, Dad taking whatever sales jobs he could find. Their grand European dreams had apparently crumbled long ago. Part of me anticipated to feel terrible about exposing them, about releasing Grandma's film. However, I felt calm as I sat in my apartment the night before my wedding and gazed at the picture of my grandmother on my mantel. Grandma, you were correct. I muttered to her photo. The truth did set me free. James caught me there, threw his arms around me from behind. Any regrets? Gently, he inquired. I thought of the terrified 18-year-old girl. I had been silently packing her bags, thinking about the woman, about the grandmother who had saved me with her love and wisdom. I had grown wiser and stronger, but I was no longer burdened by the lives of others. I said, not a single one. And I meant it. Tomorrow I'll walk down the aisle, surrounded by family who knows the real me. The suffering I've endured as well as the fortitude that enabled me. There won't be my parents present. But it won't matter if there are empty seats. I have everything I need. Love, the truth, and finally, in a lovely way, calm. I might be considered callous by some, for cutting my parents out of my life, for failing to assist them when they needed it. However, I've discovered that true family isn't about duty or shame. It's about love, support, and honesty. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is simply let go.